Sound quality. Yeah, of it. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Eh? Okay, guys. So how many minutes you want for this preview? So shall I say we the talk we're gonna be starting in we're gonna be starting in about 6-7 minutes. The talk, can you hear me?
Yeah. We're ready for you.
Everything is fine. Everything is good.
Yes.
Okay, just give us about 7 minutes or so. Some of a few colleagues are just concluding their previews.
Should simboyenza masengiqedile ke ntambama if angazi how urgent it is. Yes. Angazi. Okay.
I'll call you back. I'll call you back. My MLOs is yeah, they've got the link here. Bambo. Connect the scratch. Just one minute. Karinda. Doc, we're starting in 2 minutes. If we can sort out this then. No, not to me. You come over to me, not to her. You come here. I don't have Yes, colleagues, we're getting ready to start. Let's welcome the ladies and gentlemen of the media, welcome to this important media briefing. Today we are here on another subject matter, but that is not far divorced from the one that we normally deal with on Sundays. The Honourable Premier of the province is to give us the latest with regards to some of the forensic investigations in the province. Let's welcome the Honourable Premier. Without any further delays, I will hand over to the Honourable Premier to take us through the message of today.
Thank you, Mr. Mabaso. Ladies and gentlemen from the media, the colleagues from the department's officials, especially from the Premier's office, we would like to start by welcoming members of the media present here today, and we would like to thank you for attending this media briefing. The purpose of today's media briefing is to therefore provide feedback on the outcome of the forensic investigations which were commissioned by the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Executive Council in the following matters. Firstly, the alleged irregular procurement of personal protective equipment in the Department of Social Development. Second, alleged irregular procurement of blankets for the COVID-19 pandemic in the Department of Social Development. Alleged irregular procurement of PPEs in the Department of Education. The investigation was prompted by various allegations that were being reported even in the public space, alleging that the procurement of contracts were inflated and were linked to connected individuals. Owing to the seriousness of the allegations, in April this year, as KwaZulu-Natal Executive Council, we resolved to assign the Provincial Treasury to investigate alleged irregularities in the procurement of the PPEs worth 19 million and blankets worth 22 million by the Department of Social Development. This included, among others, hand sanitizers, pocket wet wipes, face towels, and soaps. The investigation was separated into two. The one focused on the procurement of blankets, and the other one concentrated on the procurement of personal protective equipment. The evidence presented in the reports, as we will detail shortly, is deeply concerning. While at this point it is not a reflection of either guilty or innocence of any party, it is crucial that those who have to answer on these allegations will need to be held accountable. The report will also assist the law enforcement authorities to ensure justice and accountability. As the Provincial Executive Council of KwaZulu-Natal, we have a huge responsibility to ensure that any allegation of state looting in the name of COVID-19 or any other service in government is scrutinized and investigated accordingly, with no compromise when it comes to consequence management. In COVID-19, we are dealing with a serious emergency. At a time when we should be focusing all our energies on defeating this invisible enemy, we deeply regret that we have to be sidetracked by such matters. We start by looking on irregular procurement of personal protective equipment at the Department of Social Development. Firstly, the scope of this investigation was to establish whether the procurement process was followed by the department in the procurement of PPEs, whether the procurement processes were fair, competitive, transparent, and cost-effective, whether there was collusion between officials and service providers in awarding of contract, and whether there was value for money spent on the items procured. The investigation included an analysis of all documentary evidence, interviewing all identified officials, capturing and analyzing all payments and quotations using spreadsheets where applicable, examining telephone records of identified role players, and following up any leads of possible irregularities or act of criminality with an attempt to gather as much evidence as possible. In terms of the findings, the investigation has highlighted significant irregularities which were caused by inadequate and inefficient systems of internal control with the Provincial Department of Social Development. This included the purchase orders for PPE issued to 11 service providers prior approval of the procurement submission by the accounting officer. some of the service providers exceeded the minimum amount of purchase as regulated under Treasury Instruction Note. In some instances, quotations were changed 3 times, and on each occasion, the quantities of items were reduced in order to reduce the total cost of procurement. However, most noticeable, there was no reduction of the pricing per unit. As a result of the above, the investigation concluded that all payments made to service providers are irregular to the tune of 13,630,229.50. Had the department applied the regulated prices and processes correctly, it would have saved more than 2.2 million. In fact, it would have saved 2,231,996 rands. The investigation noted that some of service providers were paid in full on the 4th of May 2020, while the delivery of goods happened on the 11th of May 2020. It is an anomaly to pay for services not rendered, but effect payment in advance. That is an anomaly that is not accepted. The investigation also noted that some service providers invoiced the departments for goods not yet delivered. Owing to the above, the investigation has recommended that disciplinary actions be instituted against the acting accounting officer at the time, among others for contravention in terms of Section 38, which is read together with Section 40 and 86 of PFMA Act number 1 of 1999, and charges of misconduct in terms of Chapter 7, which goes together with SCM Handbook, and for his failure to comply with the chapter of the Code of Conduct of the Public Service Regulation. The investigation has revealed that the submissions were flawed in that approved submission for award to service providers were done ahead of the procurement processes. For an example, one submission was signed on the 26th of March 2020, but the accounting officer only signed the submission for procurement on the 31st of March. The investigation found that there was abuse of COVID-19 emergency procurement provision, an effort to cover up, which include attempt to backdate submissions for award to service providers. It is concerning that the investigation has revealed that prices were inflated and some service providers were not compliant in respect of documents specified in the invitation to tender. The investigation has recommended that disciplinary action be taken against the Chief Financial Officer, Acting SCM Manager, Cluster Chief Directors, and SCM officials for the following act and omissions: contravening duties in terms of Section 45, read with Section 81 and 86 and 88 of PFMA Act of 1999, on charges of misconduct in terms of Chapter 7, which read with contravention of various SCM prescripts, which finally prejudiced the department. It is also concerning that the names of most companies were given as instruction by senior management to junior officials without following proper SCM procedures. The investigation has recommended that the cluster chief directors also be subjected to disciplinary processes for contravening their duties and for violation of relevant procurement processes. On the allegations into emergency procurement of blankets for COVID-19, the scope of this investigation, among other things, was to establish whether the procurement of blankets by the department under urgent and emergency cases complied with the relevant SCM prescript, whether the department misused the provision of the urgent and emergency cases in terms of the Treasury regulations. The blanket procured were delivered to the department and whether there were any irregular with the manner in how the procurement of blanket was managed by the department. The scope of investigation also included establishing whether the regions and districts submitted requests for the provision of blanket for COVID-19, whether the department suffered any financial loss in the procurement of blankets, and whether there was any improper conduct or criminal offenses committed by the department officials or service providers. The investigation has revealed that there was no record provided which proved that the decision to procure the blanket was informed by a needs analysis. The orders were issued to 4 service providers on the 27th of March, but it was noted by the investigator that the cost of each blanket as quoted by service providers varied between 350 to 559, even though all 4 service providers were requested to quote on the same specification. The investigation found that there was no evidence to suggest that the department had considered the difference in pricing to determine the reasonable value. 2, whether the department had negotiated any discount rate with the service providers, considering the blanket were procured in bulk. So there was no consideration of economies of scale. For example, one service provider procured each blanket for 500 rand, while another procured each blanket for 559 rand. While the other 2 procured each blanket for 350 and 355 rand respectively. The investigation further established that the supplier misrepresented the specification of the blankets and that most blankets supplied were not in accordance with specification of 220 times 24 centimeter in size. The approximate financial loss to the department as a result of the misrepresentation amount to 15,808,000. With regard to the distribution of blanket, the investigators noted that 4,982 blankets out of the 48,000 were distributed as at the 8th of May 2020. From this observation, the investigators discovered that over 43,018 blankets were left in storage centers with uncontrolled access, and some have been damaged and unaccounted for, amounting to possible fruitless and wasteful expenditure as per the PFMA. The PFMA prescribed that, and I quote, an official of the department or trading entity or constitutional institution is responsible for management or safeguarding of assets and management of liabilities within the official's area of responsibility, close quote. The investigators found that, contrary to the above, the departmental officials did not have an adequate and an effective inventory management system in place to control, monitor stock levels, account for distribution of blanket, and ensure completeness of stock on hand. The investigators also noted that in this case, as it was with the PPE, the intention to award the contract to service providers was signed on the 27th March 2020. However, orders were issued when an amount to the tune of 16 million was already paid to the service providers. The investigation found that the department accepted all 4 service providers to procure the blankets, even though there was a vast variance in their pricing schedule. Some service providers did not deliver blanket within the stipulated period, but were paid in full without any penalties being served. The investigation has found that the procurement of 48 blankets for COVID-19 was not done in accordance with Section 217 of the Constitution, the Department's SCM policy of 2019, and applicable prescript for urgent and emergency provision of the COVID-19 pandemic, nor all other SCM prescript issued by national or provincial treasury to assist departments to respond to prevailing emergencies. The service providers, according to the report, failed to supply and deliver blankets according to the specification and misrepresented the quality and specification of the blankets that they were eventually delivered in most instances. The investigation uncovered that procurement was not done through a system that is fair, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. It also appeared that 2 service providers operate from their residential houses, which are listed on a CSD as their business address. The investigation has therefore found that the submission on which the procurement of blanket is premised is flawed, and hence the entire process that emanates from this submission is irregular. The investigators found contradictions in the procurement processes adopted by the department, from the sourcing of service providers, the invitation to quote, the receipt of quotation to the payments made to service providers, the delivery of blanket, and the specification of goods procured. These revealed inconsistency, contradiction, and non-compliance with the process. Based on the above, the report concludes that there is evidence of abuse of deviation procedures in terms of the emergency and urgent provision, and the entire process should be deemed irregular. The investigation concludes that the fact that only 4,985 have been distributed in the last 2 months highlights that invoking emergency provision procurement may have not been justified. In terms of recommendation, it is recommended that actions be taken against the acting accounting officer on the following. The investigation is therefore recommending that disciplinary action be taken against the acting accounting officer at that time for contravening duties in terms of Section 38(1)(a). Secondly, signing of the flawed submission on the 25th of March 2020 for procurement of blankets, failing to ensure the need analysis and end-user analysis was conducted prior to the signing of the procurement submission, and for abuse of the COVID-19 emergency procurement provision. Recommendation on acting Director General, acting Deputy Director General, as well as Chief Financial Officer and acting SCM manager, as well as chief directors, and SCM officials. With regard to all of these officials, the investigation further recommend disciplinary action against DDG, acting DDG, and the CFO, acting SCM manager, chief directors, and SCM officials for signing the flawed submission for the procurement of blanket, failure to ensure that the distribution storage plan were in place prior to the procurement, abuse of emergency procurement for COVID-19 pandemic, failing to ensure that there is competitive bidding process as per Treasury practice note, and that should be adhered to, for providing the names of service providers to officials, for failing to ensure that a proper specification of blanket was drafted in line with the needs of the department, for issuing an instruction that prompted the irregular procurement of blanket through the WhatsApp messages, failing to ensure that a proper supply chain management process was followed in line with the KZN DSD policy, failing to ensure that the budget was in place for the program under which the procurement was founded. Lastly, for having backdated the signature on the submission to purport that it was signed on the 27th March 2020. With regard to the allegation on procurement of PPE products in the Department of Education, we also wish to report on the procurement of PPEs in the Department of Education. The report revealed that the National Treasury on the 15th April issued the instruction note number 3 to provide for a disaster management central emergency procurement processes for PPE. The instruction note 3 alludes to a government challenge in sourcing and securing critical and essential health products because of unprecedented global demand for PPEs and other COVID-19 essentials. The effect of National Treasury Instruction Note number 3 was such that product could be procured provincially. The effect of National Treasury Instruction Note was such that product could not be procured provincially and or local level of government. Eventually, this had a knock-on effect on the lead time on delivery to schools. It would seem the implementation of NT, which is National Treasury Instruction Note 3, would prove to be a difficult exercise to undertake because sooner than 15 days later, on the 28th of April, National Treasury Instruction Note 3 was repealed by National Treasury Instruction Note 5. The National Treasury Instruction Note 5 effectively decentralized the procurement of PPE product, prescribed the procurement procedures, and set the maximum prices to be paid by institutions for selected COVID-19 items and cloth masks. The Department of Education only started the process for procurement of the PPE product on the 7th May 2020, after a series of consultation on the cost of procuring these products. The report discloses that the department opted to approach bidders by way of request for proposals from the potential suppliers, of which 40 suppliers responded. The route to approach suppliers to request for proposal was followed to have certainty of compliance with various standards from Treasury, World Health Organization, and the National Department of Health. The report indicates that the potential service provider also had to demonstrate the availability of minimum stock on hand. Furthermore, potential suppliers were required to submit sample products to be quality assured by the Department of Health before procured. The Department of Health had to make a written report advising on the quality of the product that were submitted as samples. At the same time, a pre-audit exercise was undertaken by the Provincial Treasury and specific recommendations were made in relation to the processes leading to the final adjudication. It has been established that it took the Department of Education 15 days to finalize the procurement processes in order to ensure that the initial date, 25th May, for the resumption of schools is adhered to. The Department SCM Adjudicating Committee considered both recommendations from the Department of Health and the Treasury Department pre-audit report. It has been established as a fact that the department also grappled with the issue of prices due to volatility in the market and the depreciation of the rand. It is against this background that Treasury introduced a maximum price to be paid by institutions across the country for selected COVID-19 PPE items and cloth masks. The limitation of the maximum price by the Treasury is that it only covered the unit cost but excluded the warehousing, packaging, and transportation and delivery cost. In view of the fact that cost of packaging, warehousing, transportation, and delivery, as well as VAT, were not factored in the maximum price, the department had to negotiate with appointed service providers to accept the department price offer as inclusive of everything. The cost for warehousing, packaging, transportation, and delivery cost were calculated at 15% within the maximum price. Using one example of the procurement of masks, a consideration of 15% would result in about 3 rand 60 cent saving. Thus, the mask would have costed 20 rand 40 cent. In some cases, sanitizers were recommended at 1 rand 86 cent by National, but the department negotiated at 1 rand and 67 cents, including VAT, storage, and warehousing and delivery as well. In addition, if one were to take the matter of 15% warehousing, packaging, and transport delivery cost to its logic conclusion, the department saved more than 75 million. Even though there were these omissions from National Treasury set prices, the department had to negotiate with appointed service providers to accept the department price offer as inclusive of everything. The negotiations led to the prices being revised in favor of the department and inclusive of everything. The department eventually procured an inclusive package at the cost less than that set by the National Treasury. The report indicates that in all cases, the Department of Education did not go beyond the maximum prices recommended by National Treasury. In fact, most of the order prices are much lower than the prices that were recommended by the National Treasury. There is a trail of evidence that indicate that the department approach yielded savings to the government. This is very important in the current constrained fiscal environment. The total sum spent may look higher to a person who does not appreciate that the Department of Education is a huge department with a high number of personnel and institutions involved. That concludes the issue of education. In terms of the way forward, in the interest of public accountability and transparency, we have decided to give progress report on the outcomes of these investigations. We want to express our serious concern about the findings which reveal a flagrant disregard and abuse of procurement processes which have allegedly prejudiced not only the Department of Social Development, but the KwaZulu-Natal government and the people of KwaZulu-Natal as well. Based on the above, the investigators have recommended that in addition to disciplinary procedures, in some cases be opened with the SAPS on collusion and corruption between officials and service providers. It further recommends that recovery of the amounts from some of the suppliers be instituted for non-delivery. The report will be processed in line with the recommendations, and there will be consequence management. We are very concerned about the prima facie evidence of collusion between officials and suppliers. However, as the report recommends, this warrant an investigation by the South African Police Services, and this will have to be actioned as soon as possible. In conclusion, as government, we would like to indicate that we remain unwavering in our commitment to clean and good governance, and ensuring that each and every cent of taxpayers' money is spent efficiently, especially given the tough economic climates in which we find ourselves. It is very unfortunate and totally unacceptable that today we deal with allegations that part of our service delivery machinery might have been used to serve personal interest at this most critical time when we have to save lives of our people. We commit to take action and ensure accountability for anyone linked to wrong deeds and wrong actions. The National Development Plan enjoins us to have a professional public service where managers deal properly with contract, tenders, and procurement, and are less vulnerable to any other pressure. We are committed to live up to these ideals of the NDP. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you take questions of clarity? Can get an indication of hands, and the colleagues that are watching us online they can also send the questions via our WhatsApp number. I will start with the usual suspect, Nkosi Corner, followed by Kavil, and Mawande. So you introduce yourself and then we ask for questions.
Premier, I am Nkosi Corner from Eyewitness News. Premier, I would like to get clarity in the words you use, discipline and consequent management. Exactly how will that unfold? Will these individuals be suspended from work pending the investigations that are still are yet to take place? Will they interact with any officials within the department? If we can get clarity just on that. And also, given the fact that that report has been with you for quite some time now, has those cases been opened with the SAPS, or will that take place anytime soon? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. The next colleague.
Thanks. It's Kapil Singh from News 24. Premier, just in terms of the service providers, I mean, obviously we've not named them at this point, but will the KZN government cease doing business? Will they blacklist these companies? And I mean, you've mentioned already that some prosecutions will take place. Same question as, of course, you're going to have any of those started off at this point in time. Thanks.
Thank you.
My recommendation is Premier, that's balanced, considering that investigation has come up with these findings and the fact that you are still under lockdown and COVID is still an issue for us. Moving forward, how will you ensure that you minimize such occurrences of irregular activities and corruption in various departments?
Thank you, Premier. The SAPC Simpiwe Matanya is asking, I think, a similar question to that was asked by Pasco, and if the local government is to undertake steps to recoup the money lost. And then the other request is, I think, to wrap in this. May we request the Premier to respond? At the moment while I'm seeing the independent newspapers, I will come for a second.
No, thanks. I think with regard to officials involved, firstly, the forensic in this regard, it must be clear, was on PPEs in the Department of Social Development and in the issue of blankets. But the report on education came from the analysis within the department and detailed accountability. So that is the first. So on the issue of this report, with regard to officials, we then have now to take the report to the department, assist the department to implement the report, to take disciplinary actions. And as the Premier's office, we are not going to sit and leave the matter with the department, but we will be there assisting them where they need our assistance. There will be a need to ensure that the process is fair. And therefore, those who will have to be suspended will need to be suspended. Those who will need to be suspended will have to be suspended, and the disciplinary process must unfold. And we are not going to compromise anything on consequence management. Yes, there are cases, there is a case that has been opened already, but as we conduct these investigations, once we conclude, we have a responsibility to share the entire report with law enforcement authorities. So we will continue working on that. Blacklisting, once the process is concluded, then the blacklisting should start. We are not going to have a situation where officials will commit wrongdoing, will do things wrong, and then maybe they leave one department to the other. No, we are not going to allow that. Once you have done wrong, you must face music where you have gone wrong and be disciplined there. But to think that you will move to another department, no, it's not going to happen. But secondly, we are not going to allow that people who are service providers corrupt officials and then we continue doing business with them. We will have, through the proper processes, to ensure that those service providers are banned and blacklisted from working with government. With regard to how are we going to recoup, let me start with that one, because it's linked to what? Once the report is finalized, criminal cases will be opened and then there will be a prosecution. But then we will also follow the legal process to recover the money lost. With regard to how in this period of COVID-19 are we going to mitigate and try to ensure that this does not occur again, right now, as we were reporting, the Department of Education, when it procures, it will procure in line with what is prescribed and verified in terms of quality assurance by Department of Health. But once they've procured, Treasury in the province must come again to do a pre-audit before they award. So that helps us to mitigate the possibilities of corrupt practices.
Thank you, Premier. The Daily Maverick is asking if the Premier will make the report available in full, and when can that happen? Also, I think it's a question that the Premier has answered. I think they'll get this other one on the statement. It relates to the answer that was initially given by Education that when they procured the PPE, they included the delivery cost and the warehousing cost. So she's asking how do we explain this discrepancy? But I think it's clarified on the statement. And will assist her. Independent newspapers, the editor David Makanya is asking, where does the outcome of the investigation leave the MEC for Social Development as a political head of the department? Does the buck stop with her? The second question from him is that we have had few reports exposing corruption in KZN, including the Department of Education. How do you plan to address this disturbing trend? Simpiwe, I think, is on the rep in Isizu together with Nambuleko. I don't know if there's any other last question you can take here, last round.
No, thanks. Let me finalize this question. Availing the report, yes, I think we will avail the report, but it needs to firstly go through processes. What are these processes? Ensure that the individuals affected are informed and get report. Ensure that structures that need to institute disciplinary processes start draft disciplinary processes and charge sheet, all of that, and make the report available. We've got no problem to avail the report as we have indicated. With regard to issues of the MEC for Social Development, there is nothing that indicate wrongdoing on the side of the MEC. If the report indicated that, we would have presented it here, and the colleagues would see that when we make the report public. When it comes to, summarize ngesiZulu. Okokuqala siyafisa ukubonga kubona bonke abezindaba abakhona la. Kuthatha kube into esiphoqayo ukuthi sihlangane ngesikhathi la udinga sihlangane sisempini yokulwa ne-COVID-19 kodwa siyithole sihlangana ngodaba oluthi kungenzeka abanye babasebenzi bakahulumeni kumbe uhulumeni somewhere awenzanga kahle. Udaba esidibana ngalo namuhla luthinta ukuthi kuprocure kanjani kumbe uhulumeni uthenge kanjani ama-personal protective equipment, especially kwi-department yaka-social development, nokuthi indaba yo-blanket le ebiseyindabeni iphenywe yakwafikwaphi nodaba lokuthengwa kwezinto zaka-education. Esingakusho kafishane ukuthi i-investigation uma lezinto sizithola ngo-April salontsha a full investigation through u-treasury, provincial treasury, and i-report isiphelile asekhona i-investigation yokuqala ithinta izinto ezinokwenza nokuthengwa kokuvikela esingathi ama-PPEs okusho ukuthi into zokuyivikela ama-sanitizers nokunye lokho kucela ku-19 million. Kanti i-report yesibili ithinta indaba yo-blanket and yona isho ukuthengwa ko-blanket abawu-48,000 ngemali ecela ku-22 million. I-investigation kuma-PPEs ifinyelele ekutheni ifthole ukuthi i-payment eyenziwa i-irregular, especially i-payment ecela ku-13 million is irregular. And ngalokho kumele kube nama-disciplinary actions azothathwa azobheka ku-acting HOD by then, ngonjalo u-acting Deputy Director General, no Chief Financial Officer, no acting SCM Manager, Cluster Chief Directors, nama-officials akwa-supply chain. Konke lokhu kulele ekutheni kunemgomo abangayilandelanga ngendlela yokwenza i-procurement. ngokunjalo nasekuthengweni ko-blanket kuyavela ukuthi aqalange kwabhekisisa ukuthi sasikhona yini isidingo so-blanket baba bangaka abadingekayo kodwa kwaqhamuka nje inamba e-equal kwasubmithwa kwathengwa o-blanket. Kungalokho-ke uthola ukuthi kube namagebha amaningi kulento khona i-report ithi abanye ba-deliver o-blanket ngemali ewu-350 abanye badelive ngo-500 abanye kube u-559 kodwa uthengwe equally kungabi ukuthi nangu ongcono ezizothenga kuye ngenxa yemali. Kwezinye indawo ubuthola ukuthi even i-specification uhlobo lwento bekuthiwe izodilivwa akuyona le ebilindelekile. Yingakho-ke i-report ithi kumele kuthathwe izinyathelo zokudisiplina kubona bonke labo esesibabalile abambandakanyekayo kulokhu. Ngasohlangothini lwezemfundo, i-investigation iveze ukuthi okokuqala kwabakhona iprocess yokuthi kuthengwe izinto ngoka-National Treasury Regulation number 3 kodwa futhi wabuye wayishintsha leyo ngoba ebona ukubonakala ukuthi kulukhuni ukuthi kuthengwe izinto centrally kwase kuthiwa ama-provinces akazithengele. And lokho kwenza ukuthi ama-provinces azithengele ngesikhathi esifishane and ngaphekwa lokho i-province i-treasury yakhipha imali okwakudinga kuthengwe ngayo kodwa leyo mali ibheke i-item kuphela ingabhekile ukuthi kuthengwe i-item plus ne-delivery nani nendawo yokugcina okubizwa nge-warehouse. Kodwa noma kunjalo umnyango wezemfundo kuyona yonke into oyithengile akukho la ubengaphezulu kwemali ebekwe i-National Treasury ukuthi kungeqiwa kuyo. Instead kube khona ama-savings amaningi enzekile sibona i-department ikwazi ukuseva imali ey'ntweni ey'ningi. Ngingakuqinisekisa ukuthi le report sizoyi-implementa injengoba inje asizoba nakho ukubuyela eceleni ngoba we are committed ekwakheni uhulumeni okwazi ukunakekela abantu uphendule idingweni zabo ngokuyikho. Kusiphatha kabi ukuthi kuhulumeni kube khona abanye abenza izinto ezibheke eceleni ezifana nokwenza inkohlakalo. Inkohlakalo angeke sayibekezelela nakiphi i-department la KwaZulu Natal. Sifisa ukubona isenti nesenti labakhokhi bentela liya direct kwi-service delivery kunokuthi abantu bafune bona ukuyigwilikisa ngemali kahulumeni. Siyabonga.
Okay, thank you very much, Zulu, that part about actions on the employees.
Oh yes. Singaqinisekisa ukuthi sizothatha inyathelo zeqondiswa kwegwegwe. Lezi zizobheka kusukela ku-acting HOD, acting DDG, acting DDG, Chief Financial Officer, supply chain manager nabo bonke abanye abambandakanyelwa ababalwa i-report kuzothathwa inyathelo zokuqondisa igwegwe and i-department yakwa-social development yiyona ezobe implementa. Kodwa nathi njenge-office lakwa-Premier sizobe sikhona silandelela ukuthi i-implementation ihamba ngendlela eyiyo. Singasho ukuthi okunye sekuyaqala already ukuthi kwenzeke njengoba le report kubalekile ukuthi nathi siyidlulisele kulabo abanye baphenye ama-case a-criminal ukuze baqale bebebheka ama-cases a-criminal from this act. Angeke sakumukela nanini ukuthi kube khona abasebenzi abazokholuda noma abazokwenza noma yiluphi uhlobo lwenkohlakalo kuhulumeni kuthuleke.
Premier, I think we'll adjourn it for today because it's until on Sunday. Thank you.
afternoon, John.